Oki Naganago, Mako Cheche Stakomaki, Dakots Nagote Nesiku. My name's Michelle. I use she and her pronouns. I should be using they and them to decolonize, but I'm not very good at it. So, um, bigger picture, I want to welcome you all. I'm going to start by acknowledging where I'm situated. I'm on Treaty 7 territory. This has been historically Blackfoot Confederacy area since time immemorial. And right now, I would acknowledge the Siksika, Kainai, Bagani, and south of the border, the Blackfeet Nation. And then recently in 1877, Treaty 7 was signed with the Crown, and that brought in the Tsuut'ina as well as the Yari, Chiniki, Goodstoney, and Bearspaw nations. And I always acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. And yeah, I just seen Jenny has a note saying that they're going to be heading out a bit early if folks are okay with that and tune in to this event that just could. Oh, oh, okay. I'm sorry I said that out loud. Um, I'm going to get started here with the Indigenous women's and street gang surveillance narrative. So, for folks who haven't seen it, that's what it looks like. The cover photo is representing young Indigenous girls taken by the state and treated as faceless and nameless. This photo is by Faith and used in with permission. I'm going to ask that everybody mute themselves unless they're speaking. Um, so I want to lay some ground rules. We typically allow Indigenous people to speak first on this in this book club because originally we just had this safer spaces concept. And then I was lucky enough to bring my daughter to a book club because non-Indigenous said the book was horrible and terrible for a million reasons. She got very hurt and defensive, and it changed the tone in the course of the in entire time. And she was very proud of this Blackfoot book that we had covered and some of the things that were in it because she had read it. And from there, that started the new rule that settlers speak second because settlers have always had the opportunity to speak. And yeah, it was very eye-opening to me as to why an Indigenous-led book club is important, but so is Indigenous voices speaking first. And so I like to really talk about accountable guidelines. Running theme in my life recently very much has been um, people not understanding oppression dynamics. I live under the Indian Act. I am an oppressed person in this country. People like to pretend Canada is sunshine and roses and milk and honey, but it's not. Um, I hope that this book helps to clarify that, amplify that message. But honestly, even people in my life have become very comfortable being very condescending, speaking over me, not listening, not going over any of the resources I give, and giving new ones, going to, you know, resources that are indigenous or non-indigenous led instead of indigenous led. And I think I've lost patience with people who claim to be my ally, who don't know how to correct other well-meaning people on issues after years of knowing better. So I'm going to be a lot more steadfast about talking about oppression dynamics from here on in because I'm sad that people get comfortable being in a position of power and speaking down to Indigenous people. So had there been more Indigenous people here, I would allow them to speak first. So that is kind of the importance of Indigenous centered voices. So with this particular one, I had hesitated in doing it as a book club because sometimes I find that people like to exploit. And I was worried that this book would be exploitive. So I'm just going to start by reading a little bit of it because I think it's important that people understand. In the back, it says Amber, Bev, Chantel, Jazmyne, Faith, and Jorgina are six Indigenous women previously involved in street gangs or in street lifestyles. In Indigenous women in street gangs, they collaborate with a Métis fellow named Robert Henry to share the emancipatory expressions of their lives through photo voice. Each author shares a narrative that begins with their earliest memory and continues to the present. This is followed by a selection of photographs each woman took to show how they've changed their experiences. Readers can expect difficult life stories imbued with hope and humor. Throughout, these women show us the meaning of survival, a process of survival, resistance, resurgence, and growth. They kind of made a new word, survivance, to kind of encapsulate all of those. So, Amber, Bev, Chantel, Jazmyne, Faith, and Jorgina are the survivors. They have co-authored this book with Assistant Professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan, Robert Henry. And I'm just going to quickly read these three things from the back. So, Professor of Maori Education, Victoria University of Wellington, Joanna Kidman. These six women write about the hardships of street and gang life, as well as their courage, endurance, pride, strength, and love in the faces of these difficulties. They show that in settler colonial societies, trauma and violence work intergenerationally, and that healing is not always possible. It, and that healing is not always possible. It is already underway. At the heart of this book is about hope. Chantel says, "Don't ever fucking feel sorry for me." why why do you feel sorry for me? First of all, you shouldn't feel sorry for me. You should be happy for me because I'm here. We're fucking human beings. I have been through shit, made some bad choices and mistakes. But like I said, in the end, if I wanted help, I would ask. Jazmyne says, I don't think there's such thing as bad. It's called healing, you know? It started to fix yourself in your heart, you know? You just keep going. And that's all I gotta say. So I I did struggle with wanting to do this because I think that folks are, well, I know that folks are not understanding the concept that oppression is now. It has been then, it has been then and then and then and then and then and then, and it is now. And it continues. And it will be tomorrow because settlers still choose the status quo and prefer it, obviously. So it is hard because I do want to just preference this that I am a Satu Dene of privilege. By that, I mean, while I am an oppressed person, I have had a lot more time to understand colonialism, unpack colonialism, work on anti racism, work on anti sexism, and then start the path towards my indigeneity and my culture. And that is not a luxury that any of these women have had. And that's not a luxury that most people ever get in their life, frankly. And if Canada was even kind of serious at all, they would stop everything and properly fund Indigenous people to start working on reclaiming who they are. But they're not serious about it. They're not putting forward proper education for settlers or Indigenous people. And they're certainly not, allowing us to heal. Instead, they're allowing the genocide to continue. So I really wanted to preference that because it's really easy to think, oh, Native women are like this when there's not a context, there's not an understanding. So I thought it was important to say that in my words before we just read Robert Henry's words to kind of encapsulate what he's thinking here. So this collection of powerful narratives would not have been done without a lot of the different supports that they have here, including the Straight Up organization. But I just wanted to read this introduction because then we can unpack the introduction and the book a bit. In the fall of 2012, Robert began the project in collaboration with Straight Up, 10,000 Little Steps of Healing, a grassroots nonprofit organization that works with people who are trying to remove themselves from street gangs and the street gang lifestyle. Straight Up's mission is to assist individuals in mastering their own destiny in liberating themselves from gangs and criminal street lifestyles. Straight Up works in the core of the community of Saskatoon with an ex gang member, their families, to help support individuals as they embark on a healthier path. The project was with male members of Straight Up and was intended to examine the role of masculinity playing within Indigenous street gang involvement through the use of photo voice research methods. As Robert was working with the participants, a few women who were also involved with the Straight Up approached him as to why the focus is always on male gang members and why women are continuously ignored or treated as an afterthought. As one woman stated, we put in the work too. I could not deny, or that Robert could not deny what the women were saying. When we even looked at research policy or even discussion around street gangs, it is clear that the focus is on male perspectives and male experiences. Most depictions of women are position them as victims with minimal roles. Women transferred illicit goods, drugs, guns, stolen goods, or are sexual objects that are controlled by a male gang member, or work as a helper to look after children in trap houses. Um, Outside of work by Nahani Fontaine in Winnipeg, there is a lack of research with Indigenous women who are and have been engaged in street gangs, specific research that centers the life of the history of women. Rather, studies continue to focus on frontline workers who work with Indigenous women engaged in street gangs and street lifestyles. And I'm just going to stop right there because I think it's really important, again, because settlers always control the narrative and continue to control the narrative. But that is another great example of settlers really fucking this shit up and making women look in a certain way. And honestly, they just described the typical settler Christian view of women and then just added the word Indigenous in front of it. And then the thing I really don't like is the lack of acknowledgement of continuous oppression dynamics there. You know, no acknowledgement of the ongoing policies from the Canadian government that have caused Indigenous people to be on the streets at all. The lack of justice that we face so that we are forced to be in gangs because we certainly can't ever depend on one, the settler state, and two, settler police. That is not even in our reality. So the way we've already started this conversation, and I'm not even done the introduction, I'm already like, yeah, this is another example of a settler's point of view. And while I love Métis, I'm going to start being quite more frank about how a lot of Métis are white people and are in white proximity and use whiteness and their long history of Christian settler siding in order to survive, in order to be in positions that are like, well, I'm Indigenous, therefore I get to be in this position, even though I've never met my grandmother who actually is Indigenous. I just found out I was Métis, so now I get to take this box and I get to take this role in this university. From what I have read so far, and we're not even into it, there is no acknowledgement of any of these things that I've talked about. It starts with the settler gaze. It doesn't start with an Indigenous lens. So I just want to make really clear about that. Such approaches help us gain a broad understanding of political spaces, but continue to privilege secondhand perspectives of Indigenous women experiences in and out of gangs. I do not want to perpetuate or support a Western socio-anthropological gaze. Well, I just finished saying you fucking did, didn't I? Where women are construed as helpless victims, which reinforces Simon Halsworth and Terry Young's gang talk. Gang talk runs the risk of misinterpreting what the claims represent, the reality of the violence of street worlds, so on and so forth. So um, obviously, I already feel like he's not done that service. He's not explained this at all. And in fact started with the settler gaze. So, and then talked about somebody else without giving context as to who this person is. So unless I look it up, like I'm not going to know what he's talking about. So, so far, I haven't enjoyed this. And then knowing typically these stories, what they sound like to non-Indigenous who have no concept of oppression dynamics, no concept of our lived realities, no concept of endless poverty cycles intergenerationally, and then coming into the world with this, right? So moving forward, the tendency of researchers to speak for is common when examining Indigenous peoples life worlds. Imperial colonialism and continued settler colonialisms are founded on the idea that Indigenous people cannot speak for themselves and understand little of their own experiences. Furthermore, settler societies continue to understand Indigenous experiences primarily through the lens of white culture. At least that's said. This history is important to acknowledge because it informs dominant approaches to Western research with and about Indigenous peoples. So I'm just going to stop there because the last couple of weeks I've been working really hard at presentations with some, folks actually interested in real anti-racism training and not just the surface performative crap I see out here. And so I've been very specifically talking about health inequities and the root causes of that with Indigenous people. And so, for example, this book already, what I would prefer is that we have bigger picture of what OCAP is. So the First Nations Information Governance Center is an organization run by Indigenous people, and it talks about data collection. And it talks about how data collection needs to be done with OCAP principles, which is ownership, control, access, and possession of the data. And for me, this is already, because this is a, male, or a Métis prof, this is clearly not already done through an OPAC lens and principles. So he gets to own it, the university gets to own it, not necessarily them. So I already see that as problematic. And because it actually is through a settler's lens, even though I know he's Métis, it's really problematic. So I'm not happy with this book because I think it perpetuates stereotypes of Indigenous people without giving context as to why. So, for example, this book club has actually gone through the national inquiry. And because we went through the national inquiry and talked about the systemic issues that set up why this would happen, I think that would have been far better context to this. But I don't think the average person, like, I actually don't know if an average person would ever read this book. It was gifted to me. I don't know if I would buy it personally. Um, but I'm glad I have it because I think it's important. And I'm sure there will be people that will say, oh my God, this book changed my life somewhere because it'll be their very first exposure to Indigenous people telling their Indigenous stories. Um, and then I think too, like some of the pictures are kind of exactly what you would see as a mugshot, right? And there's some nicer ending ones, don't get me wrong, but some of them are pretty horrific. And I feel like perpetuates exactly what they say they don't want to perpetuate. So in the intro. And anyway, so I think I've said what I think there. And Jenny, I guess, is going to be leaving us shortly first. So we'll let Jenny have the floor and then we'll go with Samantha, Kat, Marla, Marnie, and Wendy. So if you go on the participants, then you'll see the list of who speaks.
I would prefer to make time for this. So if Samantha wants to go first, that is fine with me.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm actually just joining as someone that has not read the book. I'm recovering from a concussion and just really excited to listen in and hear what other participants learned from reading this book and yeah, add it to my list of things to read once I've regained that ability.
I don't know if you'll want to read this one, Samantha.
Yeah,
Do you identify as Indigenous or non-Indigenous?
non-Indigenous. And I apologize, I came in a little late, so I might have missed uh more of your information at the beginning. So I don't have to read the book.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, so hello then. My name is Jenny, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a white settler. Grateful to be living here in Mohkinstsis, but I was raised in Treaty 4 territory. Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 were highly featured in this book. And so there was a strong sense of familiarity, especially speaking of Regina, where I grew up. The photos resonated with me. I recognized many of those places. My experience would have been quite different from what the women in this book experienced as a white settler who moved to that city after my ancestors colonized a rural area, but they did that by choice. They chose that rural settlement on land that had been cleared by Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota people, and Nahewa. And in that clearing of the land to settle my ancestors, I know that the impact of that is the street involved lifestyles that we saw described in this book. So I agree that there wasn't enough direct connection. I understand that connection because of work that I've done to understand how my ancestors benefited by the direct displacement of Indigenous people that led to the legacies that we read about in this book. But I agree that the book did not make that direct connection. In the introduction, I did reflect on what Robert Henry said when he goes on to identify his own social location. I'm going to have to reflect a little bit more on how I perceive that because he goes on to explain a very collaborative, what he describes as a very collaborative process of engaging these women and soliciting their feedback on how their story was being told. But I did find that tendency to view it from my own white gaze and an educated white gaze. I really found myself as I was reading through these stories. I'm sure many of you noticed they're written in a very conversational and even sometimes a little juvenile style compared to the writing styles that we've become accustomed to reading in grappling with these subjects. And I found that actually a little bit dangerous because I found a tendency to intellectualize these concepts. And that in doing so, in not interpreting it from an emotional lens or an experiential lens, but more of an intellectual lens, I find I'm able to remove myself from it and it doesn't have that same impact, right? It kind of takes away some of the reality of that lived experience. So I had to consciously stop myself from trying to step back and analyze what was going on for these women or try and read between the lines. I'm not sure if anyone else had that experience that they found themselves trying to be armchair social workers or critics. And I found that to be a very deeply colonized sentiment for me to want to be the white savior, the white woman who can save these women. And so there was value for me in considering my own perspective receiving this information. again, I'm not sure that this experience would be shared by other readers of the book, but I personally found value in considering the bias that I was applying as I was interpreting it. Speaking more personally, when I did take an opportunity to be in the moment with the book and with the narratives that these women were sharing with us, I really love that word, survivance. I was very humbled because these were not unfamiliar stories to me. I grew up in very low income neighborhoods, and these were the stories of my peers and friends that I heard growing up. So this was not information that was new to me. What was new to me and the humbling perspective that I gained from these stories was how they ended up, because while I could very clearly see the legacy of intergenerational trauma in their childhood, I can recognize that my story did not turn out the same way as theirs did. And many of the women that I was reminded of when I was reading these stories are not alive today. And as you say, Michelle, that is directly as a result of policy. And those are policies that are continuing today, like the drug policies that are disproportionately disadvantaging people and kind of creating these legacies. And that's where I felt very humbled, was not hearing these stories because they were not surprising or new to me, but in recognizing that my white privilege has resulted in me not living a life like this, right? Even though I grew up hearing these stories. And the lesson that I then took from that, what can I take from, what lesson can I take, was from Chantel, who you quoted on the back, but she ended her story asking, like, how can we help as white settlers or people who want to help? And she said, I don't offer help to anybody unless they ask for it. I will listen and hold space until they are ready. I just listen because I remember when I first got out, there were certain people that I went to for help. All I needed them to do was listen. That's it, nothing else. And somehow every time they turned and made it all about them, and I was like, what the fuck? I just need you to shut your mouth and listen. How can you help me if you can't stop talking about yourself and what you need today? So that's the lesson that I'm going to take from this book, is there is a good opportunity for folks like me to shut up and listen more intently to Indigenous voices. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to read this book, and I will spend some more time digesting it from the lens you just offered us.
Well, that was wonderful. I just wanted to confirm, Samantha, are you, oh yeah, there is a phone here, and it's a Samsung, and it's not Samantha's phone, it looks like. So I just wanted to confirm. Oh, here we go. It's Kathy. Hi, Kathy.
Yes, every time I try to use my laptop, it wants me to update a million things, and I can never get it to work. My phone's dying, so I didn't want to use my phone. So I'm sorry I'm so late.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to see who it was so that I had an idea who it might be. Did you get a chance to read this book?
Yes, I did. I read it. I've had it on my bookshelf for a year or so, and yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want me to talk, or is there, like, I mean, I'm late, so I'm just going to let anybody that wants to talk.
Well, Kathy, I'm not going to lie. The last couple of weeks have been really upsetting to me that settlers have been taking the space. So I do want Indigenous people to speak. And I know you are late, and I spent a good 20 minutes, trying to give context to this book, because I think it was really disingenuous for a white male, so-called Métis, to put together this book and not give context about the stories that we're reading and what led up to it. And ironically, he said, I don't want this to come from a settler gaze, but it actually does come from a settler gaze. So I was really not happy with how this was framed at all. Now, I shouldn't be so mean, because like 2012 is probably a time we didn't have a lot of like I talk about, racial battle fatigue and how exhausted I am explaining a topic, and then it's like shiny and brand new if somebody else comes in and says it. So, that bigger picture, that um, we need to actually listen to Indigenous voices and have it matter the same as if it does come from a white male Métis man. But it doesn't, and it just certainly didn't in 2012. Racial battle fatigue was something I had to learn after reading that book, White Fragility. I talked to the prof in Chicago. He's Black man, and I got permission for him to use it and to teach about that. So like these are things that I teach people because I am getting burnt out, but at the same time, it's because I've said the exact same words in the same sentence and somehow it's still not being heard. And I know it's that deep-seated anti-Indigenous, sexist racism and misogyny that I face by people who claim to be my allies, right? So I I'm going to make it really clear. Indigenous people speak first in this book club, and we can allow other people to do that. But I think it is important that Indigenous voices are centered. So for me, I would love for you to share your thoughts on this book.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't have a whole lot to say. I found a lot of it. I would have liked for the stories to go a little deeper. I felt like it was a healing book for the people that wrote it. That's the impression I got, that they were just telling their story in a way that they understood and was healing for them. But for somebody that doesn't know about gangs or anything like that, I found I wish things would have been explained more for me, like gangsters for dummies or something, like I just felt like I didn't understand some of the words the slang they were using and stuff. So it was a little difficult. Um, and again, it was just really hard to read about all the discrimination that Native women face all the time, especially that one story of the woman and her boyfriend that was beating her up and the police wouldn't believe her and would arrest her all the time. Like that really like just kind of like, ugh, like what do you do? Like it really got to me, that story. And the one where I don't know if it's the same story or another one, but the woman that had her baby's arm broken in her womb, like that just was like heartbreaking that those kind of things are happening to these young.
Darn it. I think we lost her.
Oh,
But yeah, your voice.
am I not here?
Oh, now you're back. So you were talking about how heartbreaking it is to have a broken arm in the womb.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like it's really sad, like to see these kind of things happening. It was almost like a bit of a personal call to me, in that my niece, I'm kind of estranged from my family on the res and stuff, but I do have a niece that is struggling. I haven't heard about her for a few years, so it's been making me want to get up and phone a cousin to find out about her, because last time she phoned me, I know she was in the pub, and she's like, I've been stabbed and went here to get away from the gangs in Saskatoon, and but all I knew is that she was like heavily into the dope. So I'm like, yeah, she wants dope money. Like, I can't send her any money. I don't, she's had her kids taken away from her babies. And I'm just like, I've been thinking about her the last couple of days once reading this book, because I'm like, I really should have tried a little bit harder to understand. Instead, I just kind of let my fear, because I'm so white colonized, like I just automatically am scared of her, and I don't really know her. I've only met her, I think, once at a wedding, at my cousin's wedding. Um, and she was too busy getting drunk and high and stuff to really have much to do to me. She came and met me, said hello, auntie, and then she was off partying. Um, so it's kind of like I feel like I should reach out and try to see how she's doing, because it's been probably 5 years since she phoned me that time, and I don't know, like, all I know is she's been stabbed, and she's heavily into drugs, and this book really kind of made me think about her a lot, and I realized that I don't know anything of her story. I don't know how she was raised, and I really I got to feel it's my family, and I feel like I've turned my back on her because of me being, like, scared of being taken advantage of, or, like, wondering if I take care of her, invite her into my house, will gangsters come in and rob me and all that stuff, right? Like, just but in the end, she is my family. And after reading this book, I feel like I need to check my prejudices against that, like, it's tough when you realize that you're prejudiced. So I'll shut up now. That's all I have to say.
Kat and I were lucky enough to have a conversation, and we talked about how messy sometimes unpacking all of this stuff it actually is, and even for us as Indigenous people. And yeah, I got a one account who has a lot of deep-seated anti-Muslim bias that was
Mhm.
posting on my wall, and I was really sad to read that's where they're at. But again, like, our society has taught anti-Muslim hate, so they really are just a product of everything that we've seen. And propaganda, like, I had a conversation with one friend, and they were like, I really like these shows, and they lift them literally all off. Like, it's tough. So I just want to amplify Jenny posted in here, and I don't know if you can see it because you're on
Yeah.
your phone. And Jenny said, "Thank you for sharing that, Kathy." And I agree. Like, it's really great when people can personally reflect and grow from whatever intersectionality of bias that we've been taught. So hats off to you,
Well,
Kathy.
I also have one more comment in that, at the back of the book where it explains the pictures a bit. I mean, I liked those pictures of the little girls, her daughters, but then when you read the explanations or the stories behind it, and she talks about the woman with the hoop, like, kind of getting out of their way and tucking her person closer to these two little Indigenous girls. They're what, 8 and 9 or something, like, they're just cute little adorable kids, and this woman's like, so it's really sad to see that, that this prejudice is so alive and well. Um, these are just adorable little kids, and they're still dealing with that shit. I thought, things might have gotten a little bit better by now.
Yeah, I know. It's sad. Great,
Yeah.
great share. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so Kat, I invite you to unmute.
I am unmuted. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that too. I really appreciate that. And Michelle, always, I'm so sorry you've been going through shitty shit with settlers in the last couple of weeks, and will do as much as I can to not be a shitty settler and support you and Kathy and other Indigenous people in my lives and outside of my life. I appreciated this book because I don't think I would have picked it up, as you mentioned. But I liked the photos. I think it gave good insight into these people's lives. And the stories were heartbreaking, of course. I think what struck me most was every single one of them experienced abuse as children, and how that created them, and that is a product of intergenerational trauma, which is resulting from genocide. It's basically ongoing genocide. So that is really striking to see, like every single person had to experience this to create the circumstances of them wanting to join a gang where they felt seen and powerful and yeah, obviously far away from my white experiences. I also was a lower income person growing up, but did not have anywhere near the experiences these women faced. Thank you for the perspective on Robert. I guess, yes, as a white person, I was just seeing him as an academic, giving his point of view, and him saying, oh yeah, academics or, researchers are careful about, not exploiting Indigenous people, but that's clearly not the case. So he was sort of like trying to cover his ass in a way. So I appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's Marla, born and raised on Treaty 7 territory. And as usual, Michelle, you always give really good background and different context that I think, gives me things to walk away with and think about. I agree that the context isn't there. And it was making me think about a conversation I've had recently about creation stories, and one in particular that I had just recently watched, and the elders that were involved in helping talk about what the content should be were quite adamant that you can't just tell the present story. You have to go back to the beginning to give the context so that people that are watching the story understand why we are where we are now. So it's exactly what you're saying, Michelle. And I think that you saying this just makes that hit home even more, that you may come to this book of having had some previous knowledge and be, I guess, a little more aware and understanding of how they're telling their stories. But how many people are gonna, yeah, like you say, how many people are gonna read the book in the first place, and then how many people would come with an previous understanding? And there's a term I heard recently: terrorism trauma terrorism. And so this makes me think of that. If somebody picked it up that was kind of, well, I work in nonprofit, which is a landscape that is rife with all sorts of trauma terrorism. So I feel like this book would fit on the shelf quite well. And potentially, if there's no conversation around that, it is a big problem. like Jenny, I liked Chantel's story and that piece where she talked about just listen. I think, you know, as settlers, we certainly don't do that nearly enough. Doesn't matter what you're talking about, but if you would just sit and listen and not try to be the savior or solve the problem, that would go a lot farther than constantly trying to fix it and bring in your power and balance and all of that. It also makes me think about, you know, these stories. I think when it comes to storytelling, whose story is it? So part of me thought, in a way, good for them, and who cares who gets it? It's their story and they have the right to tell it. I don't know that it was packaged appropriately, but I give them a lot of credit for, you know, reflecting themselves, and throughout each of them, I still felt there was a lot of power in them standing up and saying, you know, this is me. And I've dealt with all of this and I'm still here. And so I really appreciated how they were trying to do that in their own words. And I really liked the style. I felt like perhaps it helped me understand better than if I was reading something, you know, in a textbook or more academic from that perspective. I can't relate. I didn't have, you know, I didn't grow up and have that lifestyle, but if I can try and understand a bit of where they're coming from, I did appreciate that part. And I think that's it. The pictures, you know, I don't know. I did wonder, like the author talked about, you know, it was all them, but for some reason the pictures made me think, were those edited? I don't know why. I felt more about the pictures, that maybe that wasn't really them coming through versus the words that were spoken, and maybe because the words were felt like it was more in their own language and their own context. But that was probably made me more uncomfortable than the stories themselves.
You know, I did wonder if there was a piece of this, like, hope that the book would be, because we do a lot of oral storytelling as Indigenous people, right? I think that's the massive power in a lot of the podcasts that are out there. When you listen to other Indigenous voices, like they're strong storytellers. And I felt like maybe this was an attempt at it, but I was really happy to hear you say that, Marla, because I was like nothing felt good about this, actually. I do agree with you that, you know, it's very healing to tell your story and to write it down. And but I just kind of just didn't feel good about the book overall, and I think it's because of how it was put together. And then, yeah, I never really thought, maybe I just didn't feel like those photos really fit. So thank you for sharing that. Marnie, I think you're next if you want to unmute.
Well, right now I feel extremely humbled because I love this book. And to me, I'm now wondering where that comes from. And when I worked in adult literacy, one of the projects that I did was telling the stories of adult literacy students. And we went around and we wrote down what they said and didn't fix it so that it sounded right. And so when I read about how they went about this, gathering the stories and having the women tell their stories and having the women check that they were told the way they wanted them told and so on, I resonated with that and I liked that. So for me, that was a sign that it wasn't the Western voice. However, the framework itself might have been also. You know what? This is, I suppose, my ignorance, but it obviously is. But obviously, it hadn't occurred to me that people wouldn't know the context. People don't know the context. It's just beyond me that even today, people don't know the context. It's just, And when you said that, Michelle, I thought, of course, and there's no contextualizing of this. It's just, they grew up in a terrible home. People were nasty to them. And then the only thing they knew how to do was go, and instead of these resilient and beautiful people who had like nothing but hardship in their face, it's just right here, and they carved a way out of it. But that's not what's shown. So that was important for me to hear from you, and I thank you for that. I really do. I don't know who it was, maybe you, Marla. I don't remember, Kat. Somebody talked about how they were looking for some power all the time. That was something that seemed to be repeated in the stories. And I felt that the need to have some way of saying, I'm here. And that the thought that the gang would offer that. And it made me think of Clayton Thomas Mueller, Life in the City of Dirty Water. Did we read that in this book club? And how he joined a gang. And yeah, so I felt the echo there. And I also felt the echo, and I can't remember if it was in this book club or not, of Five Little Women or Five Little Indians, that book. And which I realize in a way contextualizes it better. I understand that it's fiction, but at least you understand the residential schools and the families not being able to get at and all of that, so this doesn't just plop out of nowhere. And yeah, for me, reading the stories was powerful, because just the core of these women, the core of themselves was, I felt it, and it pulled on my own core and moved me. I also felt the photos were disjointed. I didn't quite understand the photos. And so many of the photos were like, the one I remember most was of this pile of trash or something. And I thought, I don't understand how that it said something about this represents, and I thought, how does that represent her life? I didn't understand that. So the photos, and maybe they were the women's photos, and if they had been able to tell a more fulsome story about the photo, it would have made maybe more sense. But that one liner about that particular photo, there was like the lid for a pail, or I don't know what it was. It was just this weird photo. But as I say, I did like the book. It was an important book for me to read. And the context that you've just given it, Michelle, was very important for me here, and I'm very grateful for it. And also thank you, Kathy, for sharing your story. And I hope your cousin's doing well. Yeah. So I think that's it. I thank you. Mhm.
Thank you. Wendy, I invite you to unmute.
Thank you. This conversation is helping me a lot to reflect on the book. I had an interesting experience reading it, in the sense that I didn't find myself taking any notes. I didn't find myself, I really couldn't make sense. Like, I had read the introduction, and I certainly hadn't thought beyond, this is a Métis scholar, so I did try to accept what the introduction said as the intent behind the stories. But certainly once you got into each person's story, it felt very different than the introduction. And after the first one, I was like, well, you're just not going to write anything down. Like, just take it for what it is. And I didn't understand the pictures until the very, very end of the book, because I read like from start to finish and didn't realize that there were any descriptions on the pictures. So I would like read a story of one of the women, and then I looked at the images there, and it was a really interesting experience. Like, I found myself, when I would start to think about analyzing it, I did, Jenny kind of spoke to this a little bit. Like, I really tried to push away any attempt to analyze it, because I was like, just accept this story for what it is. And then story after story, yeah, I was just reminded of the context that we have discussed in this group. But I guess by the end, I was kind of waiting for kind of the pieces to be brought together, for there to be some reflection at the end of that context that you've spoken about tonight, Michelle. And so then I got to the end, and I realized that, oh, there's captions for every single picture in the book. And then I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't notice that until I got to the end. And then, some of them seem more connected to the stories than others. So I appreciate what others have said that, so I really found myself not trying to make sense of it. But then so I finished it maybe, I don't know, a week and a half ago. I kept thinking about the book, and there wasn't really anything, no deep epiphanies or anything like that. I just kept thinking about each of them, and how much I appreciated them taking the time to say their story. And as a white settler, it did make me think, I don't know very many people, if any, who actually say their story, like, on a regular basis. It's getting through day-to-day life. All of us are very trained to curate our stories and curate what we're going to talk about. So I was left with this kind of I don't know, it was a strange set of emotions coming into the book club tonight, because I didn't have a few notes that I wanted to bring. I didn't like, I just read it and was like, I don't quite know what to take from this other than appreciation for them for saying what they were willing to share. And then I took quite a lot from our discussion tonight. I think what it leaves me thinking about is, I hope that anyone who reads this book, who picks up this book, doesn't do it without having done some work on the context. Like, I do think, as those thoughts would come to me, I told a colleague at work, I was like, I was trying to commute to work, and I kept thinking about this book, and it just kept, but I think I wouldn't want people to try to overinterpret it. Like, these are just individuals' lives. The more I thought about it, the more resonant. So what I'm taking away now, about a week and a half out, is so much of their drive forward was for their family, was for people around them, like, was for survival. So that survivance word is very fitting, I think. And also, where else would they go? Like, there's no other path, because there's no safe, number to call where everything will just be better. And so, I guess I'm just still wrestling with that quite a bit. Wrestling with what they put out in the world, and how to kind of get through day to day. But I will say, it did put an interesting lens on the rest of day-to-day life, because I was just kind of like, none of these problems are real problems. Like, it's just, it did leave me kind of reflecting on that. But I don't think I would have gotten as much out of it without the discussion that we had tonight. And I feel much better about the fact that I didn't feel a desire to write lots down, because I felt like, I think it's okay sometimes to just read it for what it is. And I definitely do trust and appreciate, Michelle, like, all the different books you choose. Like, some of them we all like, some of them we all struggle with, some of them we all have different opinions. I do appreciate the choices you bring forward, and I do trust that I'm going to learn something, no matter what that is. And this was just a very different experience than some of the others. But thank you. And thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Kathy, for sharing your voices in this book club and your leadership here. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate all that too. And I invite everybody to unmute. And it's interesting now, reflecting how everybody, I, d- I don't know if the word greasy is the right word. It just didn't feel good. Just such a greasy book. And I remember I recently did a conversation with some folks and at the university, and we were talking about another book, and they were like, yeah, but it's kind of trauma porn. And I was like, yes, it is trauma porn, but it does give context as to why. This like literally has no context. Like I don't know. So it just felt so greasy. And like hats off to these women for sharing their stories. No question. But I just wish that there was an understanding like this is where we're at. Like I have a friend who's on my couch right now, and like his ex and the kids are like, I feel this right now. This is what our life is. And it's been a year, and no agency in this city has been able to help them not be in a hotel. Right. And so they are struggling, and Alberta Works was cut off. Now it's been reinstated. Like people don't get how you can't get out of this. Right. Like imposed poverty is imposed poverty, and moving out of it is so painfully difficult once you're in it. And so, and kind of Wendy made the point, like, your problems don't seem like problems after reading a book like this. And that's good, don't get me wrong, but like there's that piece of me that feels greasy and gross because I know this story is real, these stories are real, but these stories are right now too, and they're happening all across the country, and there's not solutions and answers because Toronto Pride gets millions of dollars to for the Two Spirit, but then they totally like mess it up, and the money's gone, and not one single Indigenous organization got that money. And so these types of stories just continue and perpetuate and continue and perpetuate, and so like there's no accountability in this country for anything, and this kind of book really amplifies that to me. And we're talking about red dress alert tomorrow, and I might do media for an organization on that, and that's great. But I mean, at the end of the day, this book amplifies like we're just going to be in red dress alert zone until until because we're not doing the work. The queer communities are not implementing the calls to justice that are specific to the queer community. All the Canadians that have very specific calls to justice are not implementing them in their own personal lives. All of these institutions not implementing. So we're just in this constant cycle of these stories repeating, and their kids having the same stories and their kids having the same stories, because we're just not willing to invest in a universal basic income. We're not willing to invest into housing. We're not willing to do the work. My husband has been really upset all night because there was this number, and I think it was $70 billion of money allocated specifically to healthcare in these three major conservative run provinces that are not going to healthcare because they're conservative run provinces. So like think of a $70 billion investment into health that could change the outcome for so many people. But instead, we're going to just continue to perpetuate this over and over and over again, right? We're not doing the infrastructure changes necessary to stop this type of constant violence. And to me, like, this is such a great example of colonial violence that's perpetuated. And I don't know if people understand what I'm saying. So I just invite anyone to unmute themselves. Well, I guess I do want to say next book club is Doing Things Right. The Dene Traditional Justice by Joan Ryan. And that's a book that I've been really excited to read. So, oh, you have it showing there, Kat. So that's a book that I'm excited to read. It was actually Rosemary that had suggested it, which was I was surprised by, so that made me happy. But Rosemary texted me to let me know that they're doing some different apps work. There's like an Apple accessibility, there's a voiceover, there's an iBooks and rather to use rather than iBooks and Libby. So I know Rosemary is struggling with accessibility with some of the books, and I don't remember if she had already read the book. I think she may have. So hopefully she'll be in the next book club talking about this book that's coming up. And yeah, if anybody have any more lasting thoughts about this book or questions or anything. I invite people to unmute themselves, so and we have like the participants list so we can go alphabetically. Whatever.
Michelle, I'm wondering, sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering if you could share with me the accessibility information you have for the next book. That was
I don't have
was that
any of
shared
that.
with you?
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
have that. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know that exists. I'll do some research to see if there's, because I'd be interested to see if I can read it in some way. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Rosemary's eyes have progressively gotten worse. So like I think it's one of those things we just have to make things more accessible in general, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been speaking with Rosemary about that too, and she did, as Michelle mentioned, find an app to help. But Libby, I think, also has books that you can listen to as well. I'm not sure if the next one's on there. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I have been actually recording the next book for Settlers Book Club for her, just to make sure she can participate. So I've been putting in the work that way. So
I'm glad you're doing that, Kat.
well, it's taking advantage of my ableism, right? Acknowledging my ableism to facilitate participation. So, and also, yeah, about the photo, getting back to the photos in this book, I also, even though I said I liked them, which I did find them confusing as well, because I thought they had gone with each of the person's stories, and then found out, as Wendy did at the end, that they were all from different folks. So that, yeah, it was a little bit disjointed in that regard. But I am trained as a photographer, and I went to ACAD, so anything with photos in it, I'm interested in.
It bothered me, the Christian story, because you know, again, context, it doesn't talk about how Christianity has caused all this pain and suffering. And, you know, while some people may find solace in Christianity, that doesn't give context as to maybe why we're in this position to begin with, and maybe that family as well. So anyway, it really upset me. I'm not gonna lie. And there is a real push for evangelicalism within the Indigenous community, because so many people are lost, and everything is, you know, this society is geared towards Christianity and geared towards continuing to be a good person, and all of the awfulness that Christianity teaches. So it's so easy to want to set into that whole evangelical movement, right? And to me, that's just like, it's so predatory, because you're already vulnerable, and now you're preying on that too. Like, oh, I wish we could burn it all down. So that really bothered me too, made me feel greasy.
Yes, me too. I have to say, I did not like seeing that cross in the pictures. It was just like, ew. And then reading the story, it was almost like I wanted to skip it, but I read it. I just found the whole book. I'm glad, like I missed the beginning, but I'm kind of getting the gist. I really didn't understand the purpose of the book. It never got deep enough to satisfy me as to you know, explanations as to, you know, how they got into gangster life really. Like it was, like I said, it to me, it just seemed like it was healing. It was short little stories that help maybe these women heal. And maybe for the totally uninitiated, it might give some idea of how Indigenous people, some of the things we go through. But, you know, to me, it was just like, I really didn't enjoy the book, to be honest, not at all. Um, and I'm sorry I've missed the last couple of book clubs. Like, I do not remember. I put them in my calendar, and for some reason I still forget. It's like 1 and 2 in the morning, all of a sudden it'll be bling, oh, it's Monday and I missed a book club. I'm just like, I really, I have to apologize. I just don't seem to remember, and I don't know, I managed to remember today, thank goodness. So
I have to apologize because I think last time you said that, I said I was going to text you and I forgot to do that. So I'm going to write it down to do
yeah,
that.
I think I remembered your book club at 2 in the morning, and and Michelle's last book club at 1 in the morning. So it's like, yeah, when I'm awake at night and can't sleep, all of a sudden it's like boing. Oh yeah. Okay, well, thanks, ladies.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thanks to everybody for coming today. I really appreciate your insights. I'll stay if anybody has any more.
I appreciate yours, man. I'm going to go back and look at that book. I think it's so easy for me just to fall into the story and be with the story and forget to, I don't know, forget to look at how it's put together and the fact that it's just so, like what you just said, Kathy, about it, it's like it's short. It's just like this intense piece, but there's nothing around it. And yeah.
You
And
know,
I have to pay
Marnie,
attention. Sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
just when you were speaking, it really called to mind to me. I did the same thing that you did. I think just lent credit to the author as a researcher. I think my bias was the same as yours to just say, oh, well, this is research. It must be fine and good. He's coming to this in a good way. And that, as I sit and listen to this and reflect on it, and in the context that it's Autism Awareness Month, and the neurodiversity movement has a big the movement is nothing about us without us. And one of the areas, calling back to what Michelle said about OCAP, with research that that autistics are encountering this barrier that I think applies here, is that is a material benefit. So the researcher is benefiting from this. So what is the purpose of this, as Kathy asked? Well, in this case, that might have been his doctorate. So I'm going to take that lens, which I've been gleaning from the autistic community, and try and apply it more to the things we're reading. Is, am I extending credit when this person is inherently going to have a bias because they are benefiting materially from this research? And maybe just give a little more skepticism to research, considering it as a beneficial and frankly participation in capitalism, right? Because this researcher added letters to his name and increased his bottom line on the backs of these stories. So thank you for what you said, because that really brought that to focus for me.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, folks. Thank you for acknowledging that it's Autism Month and that we should be working on that awareness. Kat doing her good work with her, trying to help Rosemary with reading and such. Like, that's a really important thing for us to be focusing on. I also wanted to mention that I'm wearing braids today. There was a horrible tragedy that happened. Yeah, I see you both getting it. So maybe not everybody, maybe folks who are listening to the podcast or watching this on YouTube may not know, but today out of all days is April 8th. And well, it was also the eclipse, so that was kind of a big deal. But on the bad side, this weekend there was a horrible tragedy. A young man in the States went missing, and there was like video of him in a mosh pit with someone randomly coming up and cutting off his beautiful braid. And later he was found dead. And so today is kind of a day to honor Cole, was his name. And so justice for Cole, or braids for Cole. And we were all asked to wear braids. So, and the family said even non-Indigenous could wear them for him and take pictures. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll take a screenshot if you're all comfortable. Oh, actually, I can't. I don't know how to do it on this computer. And post it just to acknowledge that you know, Cole matters to us. So yeah, go ahead.
If you like, I could take the screenshot and email it to you.
Yeah, that would be great. And then
I
we
can't
can
even
send it.
pretend to have braids,
Yeah.
even if I wanted them.
You
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
okay.
Wait
Oh,
till
look at Samantha's
starts
quickly
wearing-
doing a braid
Okay,
here.
I'll wait for you then.
I'm getting fast.
Right on.
You know, I think that's what you're saying, Michelle, before about how your week has been, and then Cole, and it happens all the time, and even these stories. And
Yep.
as one of those who benefits absolutely from a system I abhor, it can be like, I think despair is a luxury I don't get to have. That's
know,
what I think.
I think that's really fair, and I think that was really strong from the women in this book. Like,
Mhm.
fuck off with that white fragility, white settler, like that whole concept in general. And I will say this, folks, like my friend who's trying to find his way, like the donations you guys give me go to things like that, right? So like, don't despair. You know, it's and that's what Walls Down Collective is doing. That's what some of these, you know, more grassroots organizations are doing. It's just respecting and understanding that these services and governments are failing us so poorly, so badly, that us just giving direct money to organizations like Walls Down Collective is better than some of the, you know, organizations we pay our taxes to. So
And they're not just failing us, they were never designed otherwise.
exactly.
Okay, y'all. Oops. I'm gonna take a photo now. There we go.
Nice. Yeah, and I'll post it and I'll hashtag the braids for Cole. Actually, you can if you want to, Kat, and then I'll reshare it, and then that way it just gets bumped.
Okay, I'm gonna try and figure out how to do that now.
Oh, if it's easier to email me, that's fine too. Whatever.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, whatever works. No, honestly, Kat, like we're talking about trying to make it better for Rosemary. I mean, I grew up with all of this stuff, and you know, I got a new laptop in Christmas, and I don't know how to change it from French to whatever. Like it's just I can't even use commas and stuff properly on my computer right
goodness.
now. So like don't feel like it's just you, it's me too. And
All of us.
yeah,
Someone asked me to post something on Instagram. I do not have any idea how to make a post on Instagram. I just share what other people have done. That's the only, and I'm very proud I figured that out. So
right on. All right, folks. Well, thanks for joining us. I hope we enjoy the next book better. And but at the same time, I mean, I do want to honor these women who were brave enough to share what they shared. And I think we're all thinking of them because we want to know, are they doing? If they're okay, knowing that might not be the case, but it is a reflection of Canada, quite frankly.
and the women are
our-
the ones who matter here in this book. They're the
Yeah.
ones who matter.
Yeah, 100%. So thank you folks for coming. I'll just stay on for anyone who wants to chat.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
No problem.
I also thank you for this experience and sharing this knowledge.
Honored to.
I'm so grateful as well, and to everyone else for their points of view. And I appreciate your energy, Michelle, always, you know I do, but everybody's energy in reading the book and showing up to talk about it, that's also an important thing to do. So
Exactly. Oh, and Rosemary also had a conflicting meeting because of the Justice for Palestine. So that's part of it too. And understandably why she had to miss this one. So
Mondays
we're
are
all,
very popular days for meetings.
isn't it? My goodness.
Mondays and Thursdays, every single week I have conflicts. It's crazy making. Yeah.
Just wild. Yeah. All right, folks. Thanks again.